I am presenting on the myth of the good old days. The myth of the good old days is when the politicians and media decided to romanticize the 1950s. In a quote by Johann Norberg in his article False Nostalgia, he states, when school children return from summer holiday, they are asked to list the good and bad things that happened during the summer holiday. The good and bad lists are usually the same amount, but if this exercise is repeated a couple of months later, then the good list will have grown longer while the bad list shorter. And by the end of the year, the good list will have pushed out the bad, and the children will have created an idealized image of their summer holiday. This is because of false nostalgia. And then Johann Norberg backs up his quote with the statistic that a significant portion of people from the UK, US, and France all think that living 50 years ago was better than living now. With 31% of people from the UK, 41% of people from America, and 46% of people from France saying so. This is a threat because when we romanticize the 1950s, we only think about the good. When we hear politicians talk about it, we only hear about the good. The booming economy, the rise of suburban growth, and the rise of consumerism. But we let the injustices done to African American people and women go into obscurity. And the problem with this is that political candidates use false nostalgia to push their agenda. They use the good old days to push their agenda, and they don't talk about the Jim Crow laws, redlining, and sexism that all went on during the 1950s. Jim Crow laws were the cause for segregation. They made it so that people were poorly educated and so that they couldn't get the same legal treatment. And they also denied Black Americans the right to vote through poll taxes, literary tests, and intimidation. It also made it so Black Americans couldn't get the same quality of jobs and was one of the main reasons for the racial wealth gap in the US today. Redlining was another big cause for the racial wealth gap because redlining is the deny of financial insurances from financial institutions and banks to people in certain areas, like Black Americans, for example, in the 1950s. This led to poor infrastructure in these areas, worse businesses because there were less business investments, and worse underfunded schools. Sexism in the 1950s was also prominent. It was prominent because there was people during the 1950s, sexism in the 1950s was prominent. It was prominent because it was not only in daily life, but it was also in movies. Movies like Cinderella, for example, created by Walt Disney, showed it because it showed damsels in distress that needed to be saved. It showed that women couldn't do the same things as men, and it also made the idea in men's head that they were better, stronger, or other ideas that they were better than women. And this led so that women were discouraged from joining the workforce, and it also made it so that women were discouraged to do the same things that men would do, leading to women not joining the workforce and not being part of society. And my solution to this is that we should educate Americans on false nostalgia so that when they see politicians using these narratives of the good old days or other things of prosperity and stability, they can really research it and question, are they actually talking about something, or are they trying to push their agenda? Are they actually trying to help America, or are they trying to influence our minds in a way that would hurt us and make it so that we don't want to, and make it so in a way that we want to vote for them? We need to be able to use history as a guide so that we can not make the same mistakes we did in the past as today. And we see it in political candidates today. Political candidates use in the 1950s as a way to push their own agenda and for a bigger power. They don't care about the American people, and they only care about getting what they want. They use terms like fake news to get their own agenda and try to falsify what the other political candidates that are actually following the rules want to say. And why is the solution getting pushed back on? Because politicians across the spectrum all use false nostalgia to, they all use false nostalgia to push, okay. They all use false nostalgia to invoke a sense of prosperity and say that there was a golden age that they need to go back to. When really, when we look back in the past, there was not. And it's also getting pushed back on because politicians don't want the Americans to be educated enough to be able to figure out if they're telling the truth or if they're telling lies. And we can see this because because with our new politician that has become president, he has used things like tariffs and saying that there was a better economy back in the good old days than now, which is not true. And in conclusion, nostalgia is a narrative that needs to be controlled. We can't let it run wild on our minds, and we have to know whether it's hurting us or if it's helping us. Because lots of the times we'll think that we'll know something when really it's an idealized image that isn't true. Like, it's been shown throughout my presentation that the 1950s were not actually better than it was now. We're not actually a better life to live than now. Because with Jim Crow laws, segregation, redlining, and sexism, there was so much worse back then than now, and it's become much more equal, and equality has been shown a lot. Oh shoot, I forgot. Okay, equality has been equality has been shown a lot more than now. I think I'm done. No, I have one other thing to say. And politicians, when they try to push their agenda, we need to be able to question whether they're actually telling us the truth or if not. We need to be able to show that they might not be telling the truth and are just trying for a higher power to push their own agenda, and we need to be able to figure out whether if they're saying is a nostalgic view or if they're actually trying to push their agenda towards something better. Okay, that's it. I'm done.
Do you have your sources?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, did your research go in a different direction than you originally expected?
Yes, it did. Because when I first started to research it, I wanted to research more on how it affected like other countries. Like I wanted to go to post-colonial Britain, where in like Russia, because I saw there that nostalgia was clearly being used as Russia had just been attacking Ukraine. And they wanted to go back to like the Soviet Union where they were all big. And when I did research on Russia, I found that Russia is not in a good place. Like its economy is really bad. But then I wanted to also, my dad, he did like January 6th prosecutions on people that rioted there. So I wanted to go back to America to see how false nostalgia was terrorizing us there. And I saw that President Trump was using false nostalgia to push his own agenda.
Okay. And then, how was your conclusion in conversation with the research that you looked at?
Okay, so my conclusion is pretty much that we need to be able to think on our feet, and politicians need to be able to actually use real things and not distort reality with false nostalgia. And we need to be able to educate ourselves so that we don't get false ideas from politicians. And what was the question? I forgot the second part.
How is your conclusion in conversation with the research you found?
And it was in conversation with the research I found, because when I looked at Johann Norberg's article and also through Walker and Esom et al., they talked about redlining and segregation back in the 1950s. It showed us that it was very, like, the 1950s were very worse places than it should have been, and that it needed to change. But since we're trying to go back to the 1950s and we're not being educated, we needed to educate ourselves more on history and how false nostalgia is distorting our minds than what we're educated now, because a lot of people just listen blindly to their political candidates instead of actually thinking of what they're saying.
Okay.